The fluorescent lights of St. Michael's Memorial Hospital hummed with their familiar electric drone as Dr. Evelyn Carter walked through the pristine corridors of the cardiology wing. Her white coat, crisp and perfectly pressed, bore the embroidered name that she had worked 15 years to earn. The stethoscope around her neck felt like a medal of honor, a testament to countless sleepless nights, thousands of pages studied, and more sacrifices than she could count. It was 7:15 in the morning, and the Chicago winter had painted frost on every window of the hospital. Outside, the city was waking up under a blanket of gray clouds that promised more snow before nightfall. But inside these walls, the temperature remained constant, the air purified and recycled through massive ventilation systems that kept everything sterile and controlled. Evelyn paused at the nursing station to pick up her patient charts for the day. Her dark brown skin glowed under the harsh hospital lighting, and her natural hair was pulled back into a neat bun that she secured every morning with the same silver pins her grandmother had given her when she graduated from medical school. "Good morning, Dr. Carter," said Nurse Patricia Holmes, a veteran of the cardiology unit with 23 years of experience. She handed over a stack of folders with the efficiency of someone who had performed this ritual thousands of times. "Morning, Patricia. How was the night shift?" "Quiet, mostly. We had a new admission around 3 in the morning. Room 412. Walter Henderson, 67 years old. Came in with chest pains and shortness of breath. Dr. Reynolds from the ER did the initial workup. Elevated troponin levels, irregular EKG. They're suspecting acute coronary syndrome." Evelyn nodded, already flipping through the chart. Her trained eyes scanned the numbers, the test results, the medications listed. Each piece of information created a picture in her mind, a story of a heart under stress, of arteries potentially blocked, of a life hanging in a delicate balance that only skilled medical intervention could stabilize. "Family. Wife is in the waiting room. Been there since they brought him in. Son is driving up from Indianapolis, should be here by noon. All right, I'll start my rounds with him after I check on Mrs. Patterson in 408. Patricia hesitated for a moment, and Evelyn caught the slight shift in her expression. After working together for 6 years, she had learned to read the subtle signals that nurses often communicated without words. "Something else?" Patricia lowered her voice, glancing around to make sure no one else was within earshot. "Just be prepared. Mr. Henderson's wife mentioned something when they were bringing him in. I didn't hear all of it, but the night nurses said he was difficult. Made some comments about wanting to see the real doctor when Dr. Reynolds introduced herself. Dr. Reynolds was also black." Evelyn understood immediately what Patricia was trying to tell her. "I appreciate the heads up," Evelyn said, her voice steady and professional. "But I've been dealing with patients like that for my entire career. It comes with the territory." "I know. I just wanted you to know what you might be walking into." Evelyn gave Patricia a small smile, one that carried the weight of countless similar situations she had navigated over the years. "Thank you, Patricia. Really." She tucked the charts under her arm and made her way down the corridor, her sensible shoes clicking softly against the polished linoleum floor. Each step was measured, confident, the walk of a woman who had earned every inch of ground she covered. The cardiology wing of St. Michael's was one of the most advanced in the Midwest. The hospital had invested millions in state-of-the-art equipment, recruited top specialists from around the country, and built a reputation for excellence that drew patients from across several states. Evelyn had been recruited 8 years ago from Johns Hopkins, where she had completed her fellowship in interventional cardiology. At 42 years old, she was one of the most respected cardiologists on staff, with a patient survival rate that consistently exceeded national averages. But none of that mattered to people who could only see the color of her skin. She stopped first at room 408, where Eleanor Patterson was recovering from a successful valve replacement surgery. The 74-year-old retired schoolteacher had been one of Evelyn's patients for 3 years now, and they had developed the kind of rapport that made medicine feel less like a job and more like a calling. "Dr. Carter?" Eleanor's face lit up as Evelyn entered the room. "I was hoping you'd come by early. The food here is terrible, and I need someone to complain to." Evelyn laughed, pulling up a chair beside Eleanor's bed. "I've been telling administration for years that the cafeteria needs an overhaul. Maybe if enough patients complain, they'll finally listen. Well, put me at the top of that list. The oatmeal this morning was like eating wet cement." Evelyn checked Eleanor's vitals, listened to her heart with the careful attention that had become second nature, and reviewed the notes from the night shift. Everything looked good. The surgery had been a complete success, and Eleanor was recovering faster than expected. "Your heart sounds beautiful," Evelyn said, removing the stethoscope from her ears. "If everything continues like this, I think we can talk about sending you home by the end of the week." Eleanor reached out and took Evelyn's hand, her papery skin warm against the doctor's fingers. "You saved my life, you know. When Dr. Morrison told me I needed this surgery, I was terrified. But then you came in, explained everything so clearly, held my hand before they wheeled me into the operating room. I knew I was in good hands." "You did the hard work, Eleanor. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for. Don't be modest, dear. You're exceptional at what you do. I've been around long enough to know the difference between a good doctor and a great one. You're the great one." Evelyn felt the familiar warmth of genuine appreciation spread through her chest. Moments like this were why she had become a doctor in the first place. Not for the prestige, not for the money, but for the simple, profound satisfaction of making a difference in someone's life. "Get some rest," she said, squeezing Eleanor's hand gently. "I'll check on you again this afternoon." As she left room 408, Evelyn took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she knew might be a more challenging encounter. She had dealt with racist patients before, more times than she could count. The first time had been during her residency, when an elderly man had refused to let her draw his blood, insisting that she must be from housekeeping despite her white coat and identification badge. She had been young then, still learning how to navigate a world that sometimes seemed designed to make her feel small. Over the years, she had developed strategies. She had learned to remain professional, to focus on the medicine, to remind herself that her primary obligation was to her patients' health, not their opinions. She had learned that sometimes the best response to prejudice was excellence, a performance so undeniably competent that it left no room for doubt. But it still hurt. Every single time. It still hurt. Room 412 was at the end of the corridor, past the nurse's station and the supply closet, in the corner where the morning sunlight filtered through windows that overlooked the hospital's courtyard garden. Even in winter, the garden maintained a certain beauty, its bare trees and dormant flower beds covered in a thin layer of snow that sparkled like scattered diamonds. Evelyn knocked twice on the door before entering, as was her custom. The room was standard for the cardiology unit, equipped with monitors that beeped and hummed with the rhythm of life, an IV stand delivering fluids and medication, and a hospital bed that had been adjusted to allow the patient to sit up at a slight angle. Walter Henderson was a large man, the kind of build that suggested a lifetime of physical labor, followed by years of sedentary retirement. His hair was white and thinning, combed back from a broad forehead that was creased with the lines of 67 years. His eyes were pale blue, watery from pain or medication, or perhaps both, and they fixed on Evelyn the moment she stepped through the door. There was a woman sitting in the visitor's chair beside the bed. She was perhaps a few years younger than Walter, with silver hair cut short in a practical style, and a face that bore the particular kind of worry that only comes from decades of loving someone. She stood as Evelyn entered, her hands clasped together in a gesture that spoke of anxiety barely held in check. "Good morning," Evelyn said, her voice warm and professional. "I'm Dr. Evelyn Carter. I'm the cardiologist who will be overseeing your care, Mr. Henderson." She extended her hand toward Walter, a gesture of introduction and respect that she offered to every patient. Walter looked at her hand, then at her face, and made no move to accept the greeting. "There must be some mistake," he said, his voice rough and dismissive. "I asked for a doctor." Evelyn let her hand drop to her side, maintaining her composure through years of practice. "I am a doctor, Mr. Henderson. I've been practicing cardiology for over 15 years. I'm board certified in interventional cardiology, and I performed hundreds of cardiac catheterizations and angioplasties." Walter's expression didn't change. If anything, it hardened further, his jaw setting in a stubborn line that suggested he had already made up his mind. "I don't want you touching me," he said. "I want to see a real doctor, someone who actually went to medical school." "Walter," his wife said softly, her voice carrying a note of embarrassed pleading, "please, don't." "Stay out of this, Dorothy. I know what I want, and I want a real doctor. Not some affirmative action hire who probably can't tell the difference between a heart and a kidney." The words hit Evelyn like physical blows, each one landing with precision in places that had been bruised many times before. She felt the familiar surge of anger rising in her chest, the heat of indignation that demanded to be expressed. But she had learned long ago that anger, however justified, rarely served her patients well. "Mr. Henderson," she said, keeping her voice steady with an effort that felt almost superhuman, "I understand that being in the hospital can be frightening and disorienting, but I want to assure you that I am fully qualified to provide you with the best possible care. Your test results indicate that you may be experiencing a serious cardiac event, and it's important that we begin treatment as soon as possible. I don't care what my test results say. I'm not letting you near me. Why don't you go back to cleaning rooms or whatever it is you people actually do and send me someone who actually knows what they're doing?" Dorothy Henderson's face had gone pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and embarrassment. "Walter, for God's sake, stop it. She's a doctor. Can't you see her coat, her badge? I don't care what she's wearing. Anyone can put on a costume. I've seen the news. I know how these things work. They let anyone into medical school these days to fill quotas. I'm not going to be some guinea pig for someone who only got her degree because of the color of her skin." Evelyn stood perfectly still, her hands at her sides, her face a mask of professional neutrality that she had perfected over years of similar encounters. Inside, her heart was pounding, not with fear, but with the effort of restraining the flood of responses that wanted to pour out. She wanted to tell him about the 4 years of undergraduate study she had completed at Northwestern, graduating summa cum laude with a degree in biochemistry. She wanted to describe the 4 years of medical school at the University of Chicago, where she had been ranked in the top 5% of her class. She wanted to explain the grueling 7 years of residency and fellowship at Johns Hopkins, the countless nights she had spent studying when her peers were sleeping, the sacrifices she had made while others were living their lives. She wanted to tell him about her research, published in the New England Journal of Medicine, in Circulation, in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology. She wanted to list the awards she had received, the patients she had saved, the lives she had touched. But she knew that none of it would matter. People like Walter Henderson didn't want facts. They wanted their prejudices confirmed. "Mr. Henderson," she said finally, "I understand your concerns. I'm going to step out now and speak with the nursing staff. In the meantime, I want you to know that your health is my priority, regardless of what you may think of me personally. Your heart is under significant stress right now, and every minute of delay increases your risk of serious damage. I hope you'll reconsider." She turned to leave, but before she could reach the door, Walter spoke again. "That's right. Walk away. That's what you people do best. Can't handle a little criticism? Well, I'm not going to be politically correct just because you might get your feelings hurt. I have a right to choose who treats me." Evelyn paused at the door, her hand on the handle. She took a breath, counted to 3 in her head, and turned back to face him. "You're absolutely right, Mr. Henderson. You do have that right, and I respect it, even if I don't agree with your reasoning, but I want you to understand something. In about an hour, I have a scheduled cardiac catheterization with another patient. After that, I have consultations, rounds, and a department meeting. If your condition worsens while I'm unavailable, there may not be another cardiologist on staff who can respond quickly enough. I'm telling you this not to scare you, but because you deserve to have all the information you need to make an informed decision about your care. I hope you'll think about that." She left the room without waiting for a response, closing the door gently behind her. In the corridor, she allowed herself exactly 5 seconds to close her eyes and take a deep breath, pushing the pain and anger down into the place where she had learned to store them. Then she opened her eyes, straightened her shoulders, and walked back to the nursing station. Patricia was waiting for her, her expression a mixture of concern and sympathy. "I heard some of that," she said quietly. "I'm sorry, Evelyn. It's not your fault." "I know, but still, it's not right. It's never right." Evelyn leaned against the counter of the nursing station, suddenly feeling the weight of the long day ahead. It was not even 8 o'clock in the morning, and already she felt exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. "He has the right to refuse treatment," she said. "I'm going to document everything in his chart. If he wants a different doctor, we'll have to find someone else. Maybe Dr. Nathanson can take him when he comes in. Dr. Nathanson is in surgery all morning, and Dr. Reeves is on vacation until next week. What about Dr. Chen? Out with the flu. Or the department is dealing with that bug that's been going around." Evelyn sighed. The cardiology department was perpetually understaffed, a problem that had been exacerbated by recent budget cuts and the ongoing difficulty of recruiting specialists to a mid-sized city hospital. On any given day, they were stretched thin, juggling more patients than they could comfortably handle. "What about Dr. Holloway?" Patricia shook her head. "He's at a conference in Boston. Won't be back until Thursday, so basically I'm it. Basically, yes, at least for the next few hours." Evelyn looked back down the corridor toward room 412. Behind that door was a man who had just insulted her, degraded her, and attempted to reduce 15 years of hard work and sacrifice to a racist caricature. And now, because of the cruel mathematics of hospital staffing, she might be the only person available to save his life if his condition deteriorated. The irony was not lost on her. "Keep an eye on his monitors," she said finally. "If anything changes, let me know immediately. I don't care what he said. If he needs help, I'll be there." Patricia nodded, her respect for Evelyn evident in her eyes. "You're a better person than he deserves." "I'm a doctor. That's what we do." She gathered her charts and continued her rounds, moving from room to room with the practiced efficiency that came from years of experience. She smiled at patients, answered questions from worried family members, adjusted medications, and ordered tests. With each interaction, she gave her full attention, her full compassion, as if the encounter with Walter Henderson had never happened. But underneath the professional exterior, the wound was raw and fresh. In room 404, she met with Thomas Mitchell, a 53-year-old accountant who had come in for a stress test after experiencing palpitations during his morning jog. His wife, Sarah, sat beside him, holding his hand with the fierce protectiveness of a woman who had already imagined the worst and was now steeling herself for the results. "The good news," Evelyn said, reviewing the test results on her tablet, "is that your stress test looks perfectly normal. Your heart is strong, and there are no signs of any blockages or structural problems." Thomas let out a breath he had clearly been holding since she walked in. So, I'm okay. I'm not having a heart attack. You're not having a heart attack. What you experienced was most likely what we call premature ventricular contractions, or PVCs. They're very common, and in a healthy heart like yours, they're almost always harmless. That said, we're going to keep you for a few more hours just to monitor things and make sure we haven't missed anything. If everything continues to look good, you'll be home in time for dinner." Sarah's eyes filled with tears of relief. "Thank God. Thank you, Dr. Carter. Thank you so much." "That's what I'm here for," Evelyn said, offering them both a warm smile. "Try to get some rest. The cafeteria has surprisingly good coffee if you need a pick-me-up." She left them in a bubble of relief and gratitude, moving on to the next room, the next patient, the next story. Each one was different, each one was important, and each one deserved the best she had to give. By 9:30, she had completed her rounds and was preparing for the cardiac catheterization she had mentioned to Walter Henderson. The patient was a 48-year-old woman named Regina Brooks, who had been experiencing increasingly severe angina over the past several months. Initial tests had suggested significant blockages in her coronary arteries, and today they would finally be able to see exactly what they were dealing with. Regina was already in the prep area when Evelyn arrived, looking small and vulnerable in her hospital gown. Her husband Marcus stood beside her, his large hand wrapped around hers as if he could physically anchor her to safety. "Good morning, Regina. How are you feeling?" "Nervous," Regina admitted. "I've been reading about this procedure online and some of the stories." "Stop reading things online," Evelyn said gently. "That's the first thing I tell all my patients. The internet is great for a lot of things, but it's terrible for medical information. For every accurate article, there are 10 that are exaggerated, outdated, or just plain wrong." "She's been up since 4 in the morning watching YouTube videos," Marcus said, shaking his head. "I told her to stop, but it's natural to want information," Evelyn said, understanding the fear that drove people to seek out any scrap of knowledge that might give them some sense of control. "But let me tell you what's actually going to happen. We're going to give you a mild sedative, so you'll be relaxed but awake during the procedure. Then I'm going to make a small incision in your wrist, right here." She pointed to a spot just below the base of her own thumb. "Through that incision, I'll thread a very thin, flexible tube called a catheter into your artery. We'll use X-ray imaging to guide the catheter all the way to your heart. Once we're there, we'll inject a special dye that will show up on the X-ray, allowing us to see exactly where the blockages are and how severe they are." "And then what?" Regina asked, her voice trembling slightly. "That depends on what we find. If the blockages are minor, we might be able to manage them with medication and lifestyle changes. If they're more significant, we might be able to open them up right then and there using a tiny balloon, and possibly place a stent to keep the artery open. If the blockages are very severe or in certain locations, we might need to discuss surgery. But we won't know any of that until we look. Today is about getting information." Regina nodded slowly, processing the information. "Will it hurt?" "You'll feel some pressure and maybe some mild discomfort, but nothing severe. If at any point you feel real pain, you tell us immediately and we'll stop and address it. Your comfort and safety are our top priorities." "What are the risks?" Marcus asked, his voice steady but his eyes betraying his fear. Evelyn appreciated the question. She always respected patients and families who wanted to understand the full picture, even when it was scary. As with any procedure involving the heart, there are risks. Bleeding, infection, damage to the blood vessels, allergic reaction to the dye, and in very rare cases, heart attack or stroke. The overall risk of serious complications is less than 1%, and I've performed hundreds of these procedures with excellent outcomes. But I won't lie to you and tell you there's zero risk. There's always some risk. "But you think it's worth it?" Regina asked. "I do. Right now, we don't know what's causing your symptoms. That uncertainty is dangerous because it prevents us from treating you effectively. This procedure will give us the answers we need. And if we do find significant blockages, every day we wait to address them increases your risk of a serious cardiac event. In my professional opinion, the benefits far outweigh the risks. Regina looked at Marcus, and something passed between them. The wordless communication of two people who had spent decades learning each other's language. "Okay," Regina said finally. "Let's do it." Evelyn spent the next 20 minutes going over the consent forms, answering additional questions, and ensuring that Regina understood every aspect of what was about to happen. By the time she left the prep area to change into her surgical scrubs, Regina seemed calmer, more confident in her decision. In the locker room, Evelyn changed quickly, her movements automatic after so many years. She tied her hair back more securely, washed her hands with the careful thoroughness that had been drilled into her since medical school, and took a moment to center herself. She thought about Walter Henderson, lying in his room down the hall, his heart potentially failing while he refused the help of the only cardiologist available. She wondered if his prejudice would cost him his life, and whether there was anything more she could have done, should have done, to break through his wall of ignorance. But she couldn't dwell on that now. Regina Brooks was waiting, and she deserved Evelyn's full attention. The cardiac catheterization lab was a marvel of modern medicine, filled with equipment that would have seemed like science fiction just a few decades ago. Massive monitors displayed real-time images from multiple angles. Precise robotic arms held cameras and instruments with a steadiness no human hand could match. And at the center of it all was the procedure table, where Regina now lay, her eyes slightly glazed from the sedative, but still alert enough to respond to questions. "Can you hear me, Regina?" Evelyn asked through the microphone that connected her position at the control console to speakers near the patient's head. "Yes," Regina said, her voice dreamy but coherent. "I can hear you." "Good. I'm going to start now. You might feel some pressure in your wrist. That's completely normal." The procedure began with the smooth precision that came from years of practice. Evelyn's hands were steady as she made the small incision, inserted the catheter, and began the delicate process of threading it through Regina's arterial system toward her heart. On the monitors, she watched the catheter's progress, adjusting its angle and trajectory with movements so slight they were almost imperceptible. "Doing great, Regina. Just a few more minutes." The dye injection revealed what Evelyn had suspected. Significant blockages in two of Regina's coronary arteries, the kind that would have almost certainly led to a heart attack within the next few months if left untreated. She studied the images carefully, mentally mapping out her approach. "We're going to go ahead and place some stents today," she said, not just to Regina, but to her surgical team who were watching and ready to assist. "Let's prep the balloon catheter and have 2 stents standing by." The next 45 minutes were a delicate dance of technology and skill. Evelyn inflated tiny balloons inside Regina's arteries, compressing the blockages against the vessel walls. She placed 2 stents, wire mesh tubes that would keep the arteries open and allow blood to flow freely to the heart muscle. Throughout the procedure, she monitored Regina's vital signs, watching for any sign of distress or complication. There were none. The procedure went as smoothly as Evelyn could have hoped. "All done," she announced, carefully withdrawing the catheter and applying pressure to the insertion site to prevent bleeding. "We're going to move you to recovery now, Regina. You did wonderfully." Is it fixed?" Regina asked, her voice still foggy but carrying a note of hope. "It's fixed. Both blockages are cleared and the stents are in place. You're going to need to take some medications and make some lifestyle changes, but there's no reason you can't live a long, healthy life." In the recovery area, Marcus was waiting with the barely contained anxiety of a man who had spent the last hour imagining every possible outcome. When Evelyn emerged from the cath lab and nodded at him, his face crumbled with relief. "She's okay." "She's better than okay. The procedure was a complete success. We found 2 significant blockages and cleared them both. She's going to need to stay overnight for observation, but if everything continues to look good, she can go home tomorrow." Marcus grabbed Evelyn's hand and shook it with a grip that was almost painful in its intensity. "Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Carter. I don't know how to thank you." "Take good care of her," Evelyn said. "That's all the thanks I need." She left the recovery area feeling the quiet satisfaction that always followed a successful procedure. This was why she had become a doctor. Not for the recognition, not for the respect, not even for the intellectual challenge. For moments like this, when she could look a frightened family member in the eye and tell them that their loved one was going to be okay. It was 10:45 when she returned to the nursing station, intending to update Regina's chart and then check on her other patients. But Patricia was waiting for her, and the expression on the nurse's face immediately told Evelyn that something had changed. "It's Henderson," Patricia said. "His condition is deteriorating." "What's happening?" "His troponin levels have spiked again. His EKG is showing ST elevations in leads V1 through V4, and his blood pressure is dropping." Evelyn felt her stomach clench. Those were the classic signs of an acute myocardial infarction, a heart attack in progress. Walter Henderson was dying, and based on the location of the EKG changes, it was likely a significant blockage in his left anterior descending artery, sometimes called the widowmaker, because of its high mortality rate. Is he still refusing treatment? His wife is begging him to let you help, but he won't listen. He keeps insisting on waiting for another doctor. Evelyn looked toward room 412, invisible from where she stood, but very much present in her mind. A man who had insulted her, degraded her, and tried to reduce her to a racist stereotype was now facing death, and she might be the only person who could save him. It would be so easy to step back, to document his refusal, to wait for another cardiologist to become available, to let his own prejudice determine his fate. No one would blame her. She had offered him treatment, and he had refused. She had fulfilled her legal and ethical obligations, but that wasn't the kind of doctor she was. That wasn't the kind of person she was. "Prep the cath lab," she said. "I'm going to talk to him one more time." She walked down the corridor with a pace that was brisk but not hurried, the movement of someone who understood urgency but refused to let panic take control. At room 412, she knocked once and entered without waiting for a response. Walter Henderson looked worse than he had an hour ago. His face was grey, slicked with sweat despite the cool temperature of the room. His breathing was laboured, each inhale accompanied by a subtle wince of pain that he was clearly trying to hide. The monitors beside his bed told the story in stark numbers and jagged lines. His heart was failing. Dorothy was standing at his bedside, tears streaming down her face, her hands clasped together as if in prayer. She looked up when Evelyn entered, and her expression was one of desperate hope. "Please," she said, "please help him. He doesn't mean what he says. He's just scared. He's always been like this when he's scared. Please." Evelyn moved to the foot of the bed, where she could see both Walter and the monitors. She took a breath, steadying herself, and then spoke with a calm authority that cut through the tension in the room. "Mr. Henderson, I'm going to tell you exactly what's happening to your body right now. You are having a heart attack. Specifically, you have a major blockage in your left anterior descending artery, which is the main blood vessel that supplies the front of your heart. Without treatment, you will die. Not in a few days, not in a few hours, in minutes, maybe 45 minutes, maybe less." Walter's eyes, which had been unfocused and defiant, sharpened slightly as her words penetrated the fog of pain and fear. "I have the skills to save your life," Evelyn continued. "I can open that blockage and restore blood flow to your heart. But I can't do it if you refuse to let me. and there is no one else available right now. Every other cardiologist in this hospital is either in surgery, at home sick, or out of town. It's me or no one." Walter's jaw worked, but no words came out. Dorothy grabbed his hand, squeezing it with a desperate intensity. "Walter, please, listen to her. I can't lose you. The kids can't lose you. Whatever you think about people like her. She's a doctor. She wants to help you. Let her help you." Evelyn stepped closer, lowering her voice but keeping it firm. "Mr. Henderson, I'm not going to pretend that what you said to me earlier didn't hurt. It did. It hurt more than you'll probably ever understand. But I didn't become a doctor to only help people who are nice to me. I became a doctor to save lives. Your life is no less valuable to me than anyone else's. So I'm asking you, please, let me help you." The room fell silent, except for the beeping of the monitors and Walter's ragged breathing. Seconds ticked by, each one precious, each one potentially the difference between life and death. Finally, Walter spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're really a doctor? A real, actual medical school doctor?" "I graduated from the University of Chicago School of Medicine. I completed my residency at Johns Hopkins. I've been a board-certified cardiologist for 15 years. I've saved more lives than I can count, and right now I'm the best chance you have." Walter closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, something had changed. The defiance was still there, but it had been tempered by something else. Fear, perhaps, or the dawning realization that his prejudices might cost him his life. "Okay," he said finally. "Do it. Do whatever you have to do." Evelyn nodded briskly and turned to Patricia, who had followed her to the room. "Let's move. We don't have much time." The next few minutes were a blur of organized chaos. Orderlies appeared to transport Walter to the cath lab. Nurses prepared medications and equipment. Evelyn changed back into her surgical scrubs, scrubbing in for the second major procedure of the day, with hands that remained steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. In the cath lab, Walter was already on the table, his eyes wide with fear as the team worked around him. Evelyn approached him, leaning down so he could hear her clearly. "I'm going to sedate you now. You'll be awake, but calm. If you feel any severe pain, tell me immediately. Otherwise, just try to relax and let me work." "Doc," Walter said, his voice cracking, about what I said before." "Later," Evelyn said firmly. "We can talk about that later. Right now, I need you to focus on staying alive." The sedative took effect within moments, and Walter's tense features relaxed slightly. Evelyn took her position at the control console, her eyes fixed on the monitors, her hands poised over the instruments that would determine whether this man lived or died. "Let's begin," she said. The catheter insertion went smoothly, threading through Walter's arterial system with the same precision she had demonstrated earlier with Regina Brooks. But as the dye injection illuminated his coronary arteries, Evelyn felt her breath catch. The blockage was worse than she had expected. The left anterior descending artery was almost completely occluded, with only a thin trickle of blood making it past the obstruction. The heart muscle downstream was starving for oxygen, and every passing second was causing more damage. "BP is dropping," one of the nurses announced. 80 over 50 and falling. "Push another round of vasopressors," Evelyn ordered, not taking her eyes off the screen, "and have the defibrillator standing by." She maneuvered the catheter into position with agonizing care. This was the most critical part of the procedure, the moment when the slightest miscalculation could mean disaster. Too much pressure, and she could rupture the already weakened artery. Too little, and the blockage wouldn't budge. "Inflating balloon," she announced, watching as the tiny device expanded inside the artery, pressing against the plaque that had nearly killed Walter Henderson. The monitors beeped and flickered as the balloon did its work. For a long, terrible moment, nothing seemed to change. Then, slowly, the blood flow began to improve. The thin trickle became a stream, then a rush, as oxygen-rich blood flooded into the starved heart muscle. "He's stabilizing," the nurse reported. "BP is coming up. 90/60. Stent deployment in 3, 2, 1. The stent locked into place, holding the artery open like a tiny metal scaffold. On the monitors, Evelyn watched as the blood flow continued to improve, strong and steady and life-sustaining. "Heart rhythm is normalizing," another team member announced. "We've got a good sinus rhythm." Evelyn allowed herself a small exhale of relief, but she wasn't finished yet. She spent another 20 minutes carefully checking every aspect of the procedure, ensuring that the stent was properly positioned, that there were no other significant blockages, that Walter's heart was receiving the blood it needed to survive. Only when she was completely satisfied did she begin the careful process of withdrawing the catheter and closing the insertion site. "That's it," she said finally, stepping back from the console. "He's going to make it." The team erupted in quiet cheers and congratulations, the subdued celebration of professionals who understood the magnitude of what they had just accomplished. But Evelyn barely heard them. She was looking at Walter Henderson, still sedated on the table, his color already improving as healthy blood circulated through his body. She had saved him. Despite everything he had said, everything he had believed about her, she had saved his life. In the recovery area, Dorothy Henderson was waiting, her face a mask of fear and hope that crumbled the moment she saw Evelyn approaching. "Is he—" "He's alive," Evelyn said. "The procedure was successful. He had a severe blockage, but we were able to clear it and place a stent. He's going to need to stay in the ICU for a few days, and he'll need to make some significant lifestyle changes going forward. But he's going to live." Dorothy burst into tears, grabbing Evelyn's hands and holding them as if they were sacred objects. "Thank you. Oh God, thank you. You saved him. You saved my husband." "That's my job," Evelyn said gently, extracting her hands with a careful grace that managed to be kind rather than cold. "He's going to be in recovery for another hour or so, and then we'll move him to the ICU. You'll be able to see him then. I don't know how to repay you. I don't know how to ever. Just take care of him. Make sure he takes his medications and follows the diet recommendations. That's all the repayment I need." She left Dorothy in the capable hands of the nursing staff and made her way back to the locker room to change. The adrenaline was beginning to fade, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion that made her movements slow and heavy. She sat on the bench in front of her locker, still in her surgical scrubs, and allowed herself a moment to simply breathe. It was almost noon. She had been at the hospital for barely 5 hours, and already she felt like she had lived through an entire week. The encounter with Walter Henderson, the successful procedure with Regina Brooks, the desperate race to save a man who had told her to go back to cleaning. It was enough to overwhelm anyone. But she wasn't just anyone. She was Dr. Evelyn Carter, and she had work to do. She changed back into her regular clothes, touched up her appearance in the mirror, and went back to the nursing station to check on her other patients. The hospital didn't stop for one dramatic morning. There were still people who needed her, people who were counting on her skill and compassion to see them through their darkest moments. Patricia was waiting for her with a fresh cup of coffee and a smile that carried a hint of awe. "That was incredible," the nurse said, "the way you handled everything. I've been working here for 23 years, and I've never seen anything like it." "It was just another procedure," Evelyn said, though she accepted the coffee gratefully. "It wasn't, and you know it. That man said terrible things to you. He treated you like you were nothing, and you walked back in there and saved his life anyway. That's not just being a good doctor, that's being a good person." Evelyn took a sip of the coffee, letting its warmth spread through her. "It's what we do, Patricia. We don't get to choose our patients. We don't get to decide who deserves treatment and who doesn't. We just do our jobs." Most people would say that's above and beyond. Then maybe most people need to raise their standards. She spent the rest of the morning checking on patients, updating charts, and consulting with colleagues about upcoming procedures. The rhythm of hospital life absorbed her, its familiar patterns providing a kind of comfort that she had learned to appreciate over the years. At 1:30, she finally made her way to the ICU to check on Walter Henderson. He was awake now, propped up in bed with monitors tracking every beat of his newly repaired heart. The color had returned to his face, and while he still looked weak, there was a vitality in his eyes that had been absent that morning. Dorothy sat beside him, holding his hand with the fierce devotion of a woman who had come too close to losing the person she loved most. When Evelyn entered the room, both of them looked up. Dorothy's expression was one of pure gratitude, but Walter's was more complex, a mixture of shame, confusion, and something that might have been the beginning of respect. "Dr. Carter," Dorothy said, starting to rise, "thank you again. Thank you so much." "Please stay seated," Evelyn said, gesturing for her to remain with her husband. "I'm just here to check on Mr. Henderson's recovery. How are you feeling?" Walter swallowed hard, his eyes meeting hers with difficulty. "Better. The nurses said the surgery went well." "It did. You were very lucky. If we had waited even another 30 minutes, the outcome might have been very different." The unspoken implication hung in the air. If he had continued to refuse treatment, he would have died. Walter looked down at his hands, folded over the thin hospital blanket. When he spoke again, his voice was rough with emotion. "Dr. Carter, I said some things this morning, things that were wrong, things that were racist," Evelyn said calmly. "The word is racist." Walter flinched, but he didn't look away. "Yes, racist. I said racist things, and then you came back and saved my life anyway." Evelyn pulled up a chair and sat down, not close enough to be intrusive, but near enough to establish a connection. This was the kind of moment that could go many ways, and she wanted to handle it carefully. "Mr. Henderson, I want to ask you something." "Why? And I want you to answer honestly. Why did you say those things? Why did you assume that I couldn't possibly be a real doctor?" Walter was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I grew up in a small town in Indiana, population 500. Everyone knew everyone, and everyone looked like me. The first black person I ever saw in real life was when I was 18 years old and moved to Chicago for work. I didn't know any, didn't talk to any. Just saw them on TV, in the news, and it was always bad things. Crime, drugs, violence, that's all I ever knew." "So you assumed that's what all black people were like?" "I know it's wrong. I know it now. I probably knew it then, somewhere deep down. But it was easier to believe what I'd always believed, easier to think that the world was simple, that you could tell who was good and who was bad just by looking at them." Evelyn nodded slowly. She had heard variations of this story before, from other patients, in other hospitals, in other cities. It was the story of a particular kind of American upbringing, one that was sheltered and insular and ultimately deeply flawed. "Let me tell you something about myself, Mr. Henderson. I grew up on the south side of Chicago. My father worked in a steel mill. My mother was a secretary. We didn't have much money, and we lived in a neighborhood where not many people went to college, let alone medical school. But my parents believed in education. They believed that if I worked hard enough, I could become anything I wanted to be." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I wanted to be a doctor from the time I was 8 years old. I saw a show on TV about surgeons, and I thought, that's what I want to do. I want to save lives. So I studied. I studied harder than anyone I knew. I got a scholarship to Northwestern. I graduated at the top of my class. I got into the University of Chicago School of Medicine. I did my residency at Johns Hopkins, which is one of the best hospitals in the country. And now I'm here at St. Michael's, where I've spent the last 8 years helping people like you." Walter's eyes had grown moist, and he blinked rapidly, trying to keep his emotions in check. "I didn't earn this coat because of affirmative action," Evelyn continued. "I earned it because I worked for it, just like you earned your career, whatever that was, through hard work and dedication. The difference is that when you walked into a room, people assumed you belonged. When I walk into a room, I have to prove myself, every single time." "I'm sorry," Walter said, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I appreciate your apology. I really do. But apologies don't change the fact that your beliefs almost killed you today. If I had been less persistent, if I had decided that saving you wasn't worth the emotional cost, you would be dead right now. Your wife would be planning your funeral instead of holding your hand." Dorothy began to cry softly, her shoulders shaking as she pressed Walter's hand to her cheek. "I want you to think about that," Evelyn said. "Really think about it, not just today, but for the rest of your life. Think about how close you came to dying because of your prejudice. And then ask yourself, how many other people have I misjudged? How many opportunities have I missed? How much poorer has my life been because I was too blind to see the humanity in people who didn't look like me?" Walter nodded slowly, tears now streaming freely down his weathered cheeks. "I'll think about it, I promise I'll think about it every day." Evelyn stood up, straightening her coat. "I'm going to check on you again this evening. In the meantime, get some rest. Your heart has been through a lot today, and it needs time to heal." She turned to leave, but Walter's voice stopped her at the door. "Dr. Carter?" She looked back over her shoulder. "Thank you, not just for saving my life, for being better than I deserved." Evelyn considered him for a long moment, this man who had hurt her so deeply and who was now trying in his imperfect way to make amends. She had seen it before, the way brushes with mortality could crack open the hardest hearts. Whether that crack would lead to genuine change or would seal over again once the fear faded was something only time would tell. "You're welcome, Mr. Henderson. Take care of yourself." She left the ICU and made her way back to the cardiology wing, where the afternoon had brought a new wave of patients to see, charts to review, and decisions to make. The work never stopped, and in some ways, Evelyn was grateful for that. The rhythm of medicine, its constant demands and endless challenges, was a kind of anchor that kept her grounded when her emotions threatened to carry her away. By the time she finished her shift that evening, the sun had long since set, and the winter darkness had settled over Chicago like a heavy blanket. She walked through the parking garage to her car, her footsteps echoing in the concrete structure, and sat for a moment in the driver's seat before starting the engine. It had been one of the most emotionally exhausting days of her career, and yet, in a strange way, it had also been one of the most meaningful. She had confronted racism directly. She had refused to let it diminish her or compromise her commitment to her patients. And she had proven, not just to Walter Henderson but to herself, that her character was stronger than any prejudice could break. As she drove home through the quiet streets of Chicago, passing through neighborhoods that had shaped her and challenges that had tested her, Evelyn felt a deep sense of pride. Not the loud, boastful kind of pride, but the quiet, settled kind that comes from knowing who you are and refusing to be defined by anyone else's narrow expectations. She was Dr. Evelyn Carter. She was a healer, a fighter, and a survivor. And tomorrow she would wake up and do it all again. The next morning came grey and cold, with fresh snow falling from a sky the colour of dishwater. Evelyn arrived at the hospital at her usual time, 6:45, and went through her usual routine, changing into her white coat, checking in at the nursing station, reviewing the charts of her patients. Patricia was there, as always, with fresh coffee and the night shift report. "Good morning, Dr. Carter. How are you feeling? Ready for another day?" Evelyn said. "How's Mr. Henderson?" "Stable. He had a good night. No complications. I actually heard him apologizing to one of the night nurses for something he said when he was admitted. She seemed surprised." Evelyn allowed herself a small smile. Maybe people can change after all. Maybe. His son arrived from Indianapolis last night. Nice young man, very polite, very grateful for what you did. Good. I'm glad he has family here to support him. She made her rounds, starting with the patients in the ICU. Walter Henderson was awake when she entered his room, and his face showed a mixture of relief and apprehension when he saw her. "Good morning, Dr. Carter," he said, his voice stronger than it had been the day before. "Good morning, Mr. Henderson. How are you feeling?" "Better. A lot better. The chest pain is almost gone. I can breathe without feeling like there's a weight on me. That's good. All your vitals look excellent. If things continue like this, we should be able to move you out of the ICU tomorrow." "That's wonderful news," Dorothy said, her face brightening. "Did you hear that, Walter? You're getting better." "I heard," Walter said. He hesitated, then looked at Evelyn with an expression of earnest sincerity. "Dr. Carter, I spent all last night thinking about what you said, about my prejudice almost killing me, about all the people I've misjudged." Evelyn waited, not prompting him but giving him space to say what he needed to say. "I realized that I've been living my whole life with blinders on. I've been surrounded by people who looked like me, thought like me, believed the same things I did, and it made me stupid. It made me blind to everything. To people like you, who worked so hard and deserve so much respect, to everything I've been missing." "And what are you going to do about it?" Evelyn asked. The question was genuine, not accusatory. She wanted to know if his epiphany was real or just a temporary response to fear. "I'm going to start by educating myself. My son, Danny, he's been trying to talk to me about these things for years, but I never listened. I'm going to start listening now, and I'm going to apologize. To everyone I've ever hurt with my words or my assumptions. It won't undo the damage, but it's a start." Evelyn nodded slowly. "That's a good start, Mr. Henderson. Change doesn't happen overnight, but it has to start somewhere." "I know, and I want you to know that I'm going to tell everyone about you, everyone I know. I'm going to tell them that the best doctor I've ever met, the person who saved my life, was a black woman from the south side of Chicago. And if they have anything bad to say about that, I'll tell them exactly what I think of their opinions." For the first time in their acquaintance, Evelyn allowed herself a genuine smile. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Henderson. But the best thing you can do isn't to tell people about me. It's to treat everyone you meet with the same respect and dignity, regardless of what they look like. That's how you really honor what happened here." "I will," Walter said, his voice firm with conviction. "I promise you, I will." The days that followed brought a gradual improvement in Walter's condition and a gradual deepening of his transformation. Evelyn visited him regularly, monitoring his recovery, adjusting his medications, and ensuring that his damaged heart was healing properly. With each visit, she saw a man who was genuinely grappling with the prejudices of a lifetime, asking questions, seeking understanding, trying to become better. Danny Henderson, Walter's 42-year-old son, was a professor of sociology at a university in Indianapolis. He had spent his career studying issues of race and inequality, and he had struggled for years to get through to his father. Now, with the catalyst of a near-death experience and the undeniable humanity of Dr. Evelyn Carter, he finally had an opening. "I can't thank you enough," Danny told Evelyn during one of his visits, "not just for saving his life, but for saving— I don't know how to describe it, for saving his soul, maybe. He's been a different person since that day. It's like a switch flipped in his head." "I just did my job," Evelyn said. "Your father did the hard work of changing his own mind." But he wouldn't have done it without you, without seeing you in action, without hearing you speak. You showed him that everything he believed was wrong, and you did it with grace and professionalism that I can only describe as superhuman. I'm not superhuman, Danny. I'm just a doctor who believes that everyone deserves care, even when they don't deserve respect. That distinction, Danny said, his eyes alight with the passion of an academic who had found a perfect example of a complex theory, is exactly what makes you remarkable. You separated the obligation to care from the demand for respect. You showed him that you could fulfill your duty without surrendering your dignity. That's extraordinary. Evelyn accepted the compliment with the modest grace she had cultivated over years of similar praise. She never let it go to her head, never allowed herself to believe that she was somehow special or above the ordinary struggles of human existence. But she appreciated the recognition, especially from someone who clearly understood the significance of what had happened. A week after his admission, Walter Henderson was discharged from St. Michael's Memorial Hospital. His heart was healing well, his blood pressure was under control, and his prognosis was excellent, provided he followed the lifestyle changes that Evelyn had prescribed. He left with a folder full of instructions, a bag full of medications, and a changed perspective that would reshape the rest of his life. Before he went, he asked to speak with Evelyn one last time. "I want to give you something," he said, reaching into the pocket of the jacket Dorothy had brought for him to wear home. He pulled out a small box, worn and slightly battered, and handed it to her. Evelyn opened the box and found a medal inside, tarnished with age, but still gleaming with the unmistakable luster of bronze. It was a military medal, the kind awarded for valor in combat. "It belonged to my father," Walter explained. "He fought in World War II. He was at Normandy, one of the first wave to hit the beach. He won this for bravery under fire. He gave it to me when I turned 18, and I've carried it with me ever since." "Mr. Henderson, I can't accept this," Evelyn said, trying to hand it back. "This is a family heirloom. It belongs with you and your children." "I want you to have it," Walter insisted. "My father was the bravest man I ever knew. Until I met you. You walked into a room where you knew you weren't welcome, and you offered to save the life of someone who had just insulted you to your face. That takes a different kind of courage than running into enemy fire, but it's just as real, maybe more real." Evelyn looked at the medal, felt its weight in her palm. It was a symbol of sacrifice and valor given by a man who was learning, slowly and painfully, to recognize those qualities in people he had once dismissed. "I'll treasure it," she said finally. "Thank you." Walter shook her hand, and this time there was no hesitation, no reluctance. His grip was firm and warm, the handshake of equals who had come to respect each other through the crucible of shared experience. "No, Dr. Carter, thank you." He left with his family, and Evelyn returned to her work. The hospital continued to bustle with its endless parade of patients, each one bringing their own story, their own struggles, their own potential for transformation. She treated them all with the same care and dedication, never knowing which encounters might prove to be turning points in their lives or in hers. In the weeks that followed, she began to receive letters. They came from Walter, who wrote to tell her about his progress in understanding the issues he had been blind to for so long. They came from Danny, who invited her to speak at his university about her experiences as a black woman in medicine. They came from Dorothy, who enclosed photos of family gatherings and reported on Walter's ongoing journey toward becoming a better person. And they came from strangers, people who had heard Walter's story from his own lips and had been moved to share their own experiences, their own struggles with prejudice and discrimination, their own hopes for a more just and equitable world. Evelyn read every letter, though she didn't always have time to respond. They reminded her why she had chosen this path, why she had endured the sleepless nights and the endless studying and the moments of doubt and despair. Medicine was not just about healing bodies. It was about healing hearts in every sense of the word. One evening, about 2 months after Walter's discharge, Evelyn was at home in her apartment on the north side of Chicago. The winter had finally begun to release its grip, and the first tentative signs of spring were appearing in the form of birdsong and longer days. She sat by her window with a cup of tea, looking out at the city she loved, and reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from her mother, asking if she was coming for Sunday dinner. She smiled and typed a reply, confirming that she would be there. Her mother, Loretta Carter, was 82 years old now, living in the same house on the South Side where Evelyn had grown up. She had watched her daughter's career with a pride that knew no bounds, attending every graduation, reading every published paper, celebrating every achievement. And she had been there through the hard times too, offering comfort and counsel when the world seemed determined to knock Evelyn down. When Evelyn arrived at her mother's house that Sunday, the smell of collard greens and cornbread filled the air, a scent that immediately transported her back to her childhood. Loretta was in the kitchen, moving with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had cooked thousands of meals in that same space. "There's my doctor, daughter," Loretta said, pulling Evelyn into a warm embrace. "How are you, baby? You look tired." "I'm fine, Mama. Just busy." "You're always busy. When are you going to slow down and take care of yourself?" "Doctors don't get to slow down. There are always more patients who need help." Loretta clucked her tongue in affectionate disapproval. "You're going to work yourself into an early grave. That's what I keep telling you. And I keep telling you that I'm fine. Now are you going to let me help with dinner, or are you going to lecture me all night?" They cooked together in comfortable silence, punctuated by occasional snippets of conversation about family, neighborhood gossip, and the mundane details of daily life. It was only over dinner that Evelyn told her mother about Walter Henderson. Loretta listened without interruption, her face a study in controlled emotion as Evelyn recounted the insults, the confrontation, the desperate race to save a man's life, and the unexpected transformation that followed. When Evelyn finished, Loretta set down her fork and looked at her daughter with eyes that glistened with unshed tears. "I'm proud of you, baby. More proud than words can say." "I just did my job, Mama." "No, you did more than that. You could have walked away. Anyone would have understood if you had. But you didn't. You stood your ground. You kept your dignity, and you saved that man's life. And then you gave him a chance to become better. That's not just doing your job. That's being the kind of person I always hoped you would be." Evelyn felt a lump form in her throat. Her mother's approval meant more to her than any award or accolade she had ever received. "I learned it from you," she said. "You always taught me that the measure of a person isn't how they treat people who are kind to them. It's how they treat people who aren't." "I'm glad you were listening," Loretta said with a small smile. "Sometimes I wondered." They finished dinner and moved to the living room, where Loretta brought out old photo albums, and they spent the evening looking at pictures from Evelyn's childhood. There she was, at age 8, dressed as a doctor for Halloween. At 12, winning the science fair with a project on the human heart. At 18, graduating from high school as valedictorian, and on, through college and medical school and residency, a visual chronicle of a life dedicated to the pursuit of healing. "You've come so far," Loretta said, running her finger over a picture of Evelyn in her white coat on the day she became a fully licensed physician. "When I think about where we started, how little we had, and then I look at what you've become, it's like a miracle. It's not a miracle, Mama, it's hard work." "That too. But there's something more. There's a light in you, Evelyn, a light that shines through everything you do. That's what saved Walter Henderson. Not just your medical skills, but that light." Evelyn didn't know what to say. Her mother had always had a way of seeing things that Evelyn herself couldn't see, of articulating truths that felt too large for ordinary words. "I love you, Mama," she said finally. "I love you too, baby. Now help me put these albums away. It's past my bedtime." Spring arrived in full force, bringing warmth and colour to a city that had spent too long in the grip of winter. At St. Michael's Memorial Hospital, the cardiology wing continued its vital work, saving lives and healing hearts, one patient at a time. Evelyn's reputation grew as word of her skills and her character spread. Patients specifically requested her, drawn by the stories they had heard of a doctor who combined technical excellence with genuine compassion. Colleagues sought her advice, recognizing in her a wisdom that went beyond medical knowledge. And the hospital administration began to speak of her in terms that suggested future leadership roles, positions of influence that would allow her to shape the direction of cardiac care for years to come. But Evelyn took none of it for granted. She knew how quickly fortunes could change, how fragile success could be in a world that still harbored prejudices that could bring a person low at any moment. She continued to work with the same diligence she had always shown, treating each patient as an individual worthy of her full attention and care. One afternoon in late April, she received a phone call from an unfamiliar number. The voice on the other end was Danny Henderson's. "Dr. Carter, I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. I have some news I wanted to share with you." "Not at all, Danny. What's going on?" "My father passed away this morning, peacefully in his sleep." His heart just stopped. Evelyn felt a wave of sadness wash over her. Despite the difficult start to their relationship, she had come to care about Walter Henderson, to hope that his journey toward becoming a better person would continue for many more years. "I'm so sorry, Danny. How are you holding up?" "I'm okay. We all knew it was coming eventually. His heart was just too damaged despite everything you did. But I wanted you to know something. The last 3 months of my father's life were the happiest I've ever seen him. He read books he never would have touched before. He reached out to people he had wronged. He even started volunteering at a community center on the South Side, helping kids with their homework. That's wonderful, Danny. I'm glad he found that peace. He found it because of you, because you showed him what real strength and real character looked like. Because you refused to let his prejudice define how you treated him. In the end, you didn't just save his life, you saved his soul." Evelyn was silent for a moment, processing the weight of Danny's words. "There's one more thing," Danny continued. "In his will, my father left a significant donation to the hospital, specifically earmarked for a scholarship fund for medical students from underrepresented backgrounds. He called it the Dr. Evelyn Carter Scholarship Fund. He wanted it to help other young people who are facing the same obstacles you faced." Evelyn felt tears prick at her eyes. It was a gesture she never could have anticipated, a legacy that would extend far beyond Walter Henderson's own life. "I don't know what to say, Danny. That's incredibly generous. It's what he wanted. It's how he wanted to be remembered. Not as the man who made racist comments in a hospital room, but as someone who learned from his mistakes and tried to make the world a little bit better. I'll remember him that way," Evelyn said. "I promise." After she hung up the phone, Evelyn sat in her office for a long time, thinking about the strange path that had led from that painful morning in room 412 to this moment of unexpected grace. Walter Henderson had been a flawed man, a product of his upbringing and his environment, someone who had carried prejudices that nearly cost him his life. But in the end, he had found the courage to change, to grow, to become something more than what he had been. And wasn't that the whole point of healing? Not just to fix what was broken, but to create the possibility for something new. She thought about the scholarship fund that would bear her name, about the young people from neighborhoods like hers who would have a chance to pursue their dreams because of Walter Henderson's generosity. She thought about the ripples that spread outward from every act of compassion, touching lives in ways that could never be fully predicted or measured. And she thought about her mother's words, about the light that shone through everything she did. Maybe that light wasn't something special about Evelyn. Maybe it was something that existed in everyone, waiting to be kindled by the right moment, the right encounter, the right example. Maybe healing was contagious. That evening, she went home to her apartment and sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the sun set over Chicago in a blaze of orange and gold. The city spread out before her, millions of lives unfolding in their own private dramas, their own struggles and triumphs, and moments of unexpected grace. She was one small part of that vast tapestry, one thread among millions. But every thread mattered. Every act of kindness, every gesture of compassion, every moment of courage in the face of prejudice, they all contributed to the larger pattern, the ongoing work of making the world a little bit better than it was before. Her phone buzzed with another text from her mother. "Watched a documentary about heart surgery tonight. Made me think of you. So proud of my baby girl." Evelyn smiled and typed back, "Thanks, Mama. Love you." Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new patients, new opportunities to make a difference. But tonight, she was content to sit with her tea and watch the light fade from the sky, grateful for the life she had built and the work she got to do. This was what it meant to be a healer. Not just fixing bodies, but touching souls. Not just saving lives, but inspiring change. Not just practicing medicine, but embodying the values that made medicine meaningful. Evelyn Carter, Doctor of Medicine, Healer of Hearts. 3 years passed, and each one brought new stories, new challenges, and new opportunities for growth. The Dr. Evelyn Carter Scholarship Fund flourished, providing financial support and mentorship to dozens of young people from underrepresented backgrounds who were pursuing careers in medicine. Evelyn personally reviewed every application, met with every recipient, and followed their progress with the same attention she gave to her patients. Among the first recipients was a young woman named Jasmine Williams, who had grown up in the same neighborhood where Evelyn was raised. Jasmine had lost her father to a heart attack when she was 12 years old, and the experience had ignited in her a passion for cardiology that drove every decision she made. "Dr. Carter," Jasmine said during their first meeting, "I read about what happened with Mr. Henderson, how you saved his life even after he said those terrible things to you. I want you to know that your story inspired me to keep going when I wanted to give up. When people told me I wasn't smart enough, or I wasn't good enough, or I didn't belong in medical school, I thought about you, and I kept going." "That's the best thing anyone has ever said to me," Evelyn replied, genuinely moved. "And I want you to know something. There will be more moments like that, more people who doubt you, who dismiss you, who try to make you feel small. But every time that happens, remember that their opinions don't define you. Your work defines you. Your character defines you. And if you stay true to those things, nothing and no one can stop you." Jasmine went on to graduate near the top of her class and began her residency at Johns Hopkins, the same program where Evelyn had trained. They stayed in touch, exchanging emails and occasional phone calls, their relationship evolving from mentor and mentee to something more like colleagues, united by their shared commitment to excellence and their shared experience of navigating a profession that sometimes seemed determined to exclude people who looked like them. The hospital continued to change too. Evelyn was promoted to Chief of Cardiology, a position that gave her influence over hiring, training, and policy. She used that influence to push for greater diversity in the department, not through quotas or preferential treatment, but through active outreach to medical schools with diverse student bodies, and through the creation of support systems for residents and staff from underrepresented backgrounds. The goal isn't to lower standards. she explained at a department meeting when some colleagues questioned her initiatives. The goal is to expand the pool of candidates. When you only recruit from the same places, you only get the same kinds of people. And when you only have one kind of person in a room, you miss out on perspectives and ideas that could make your work better. Diversity isn't about charity, it's about excellence. Some people were convinced, others remained skeptical, but over time the results spoke for themselves. The cardiology department at St. Michael's became known as one of the most innovative and effective in the region, attracting top talent from across the country and producing outcomes that consistently exceeded national benchmarks. Evelyn knew that she couldn't take all the credit. Success was always a team effort, the product of countless individuals working together toward a common goal. But she also knew that leadership mattered, that the tone set at the top could either enable or inhibit the full potential of everyone in an organization, and she was determined to be the kind of leader who enabled. On the 5th anniversary of Walter Henderson's death, Danny Henderson organized a memorial event at the community center where his father had volunteered during the last months of his life. He invited Evelyn to speak, and she accepted, recognizing the importance of honoring a man whose journey had meant so much to so many people. The community center was packed with neighbors, volunteers, and young people who had benefited from the programs Walter Henderson had helped to support. Many of them were Black or Hispanic, the very people Walter had once dismissed with casual prejudice. Now they gathered to celebrate his memory, not because of who he had been at the start of his life, but because of who he had become at the end. Evelyn stepped to the podium and looked out at the faces before her. Young and old, black and white and brown, united in their shared experience of loss and hope. "I first met Walter Henderson in a hospital room," she began. "He was scared and in pain and facing the possibility that he might die. And he looked at me, a black woman in a white coat, and he decided that I couldn't possibly be a real doctor. He told me to go back to cleaning rooms." A murmur went through the crowd, a mixture of shock and recognition from those who had heard the story before. "An hour later, I saved his life." She paused, letting the simple statement hang in the air. "I'm not telling you this to make myself sound heroic. I'm telling you this because it's the truth, and because what happened next matters more than what happened first. Walter Henderson could have stayed the same person he had always been. He could have dismissed our encounter as an aberration, a lucky break that didn't require him to change anything about the way he saw the world. But he didn't. He chose to learn. He chose to grow. He chose to become better. She looked at Danny, who sat in the front row with tears streaming down his face. In the last months of his life, Walter volunteered here at this community center. He tutored kids who looked nothing like him. He listened to their stories, their dreams, their struggles, and he let them change him, just as he was changing them. That's what redemption looks like. Not a single moment of transformation, but a daily commitment to being better than you were the day before. I've been a doctor for almost 20 years now. I've saved thousands of lives, and I've lost patients despite my best efforts. But the encounter with Walter Henderson stands out in my memory as one of the most important of my career. Not because it was the most dramatic, or because it tested my skills the most, but because it taught me something I had known intellectually but hadn't fully understood in my heart, that people are not fixed, that prejudice can be unlearned, that even the hardest hearts can be cracked open by the right combination of circumstance and grace. She looked out at the crowd again, seeing in their faces the full spectrum of human experience, joy and sorrow, hope and fear, cynicism and faith. Walter Henderson's journey isn't finished. It continues in every young person who receives a scholarship in his name. It continues in every life touched by the programs he helped to support. It continues in the ongoing work of building a world where people are judged by their character rather than the color of their skin. Walter would have liked that. It would have meant that his mistakes weren't the end of his story, but the beginning of something new. She stepped back from the podium, and the room erupted in applause. People stood, wiping their eyes, reaching out to shake her hand or embrace her as she made her way through the crowd. Danny Henderson found her and pulled her into a tight hug. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for everything." "Your father did the hard work," she replied. "I just held up a mirror." The event marked a turning point, not just in Evelyn's career, but in her sense of her own impact on the world. She had always known that her work mattered, that the lives she saved and the patients she helped were important. But now she understood something more, that her example mattered too. That by living her values in the face of adversity, she was showing others what was possible. That by refusing to let prejudice diminish her, she was creating space for others to stand tall. This understanding shaped the next phase of her career. She began to write and speak publicly about her experiences, sharing the lessons she had learned with audiences that ranged from medical students to corporate executives to community groups. Her message was always the same: excellence is the best answer to prejudice, dignity is stronger than discrimination, and change is always possible for individuals and for institutions. She didn't claim to have all the answers. She acknowledged the systemic barriers that made success harder for some people than for others. She recognized that individual stories of triumph couldn't substitute for structural change. But she also insisted that individual actions mattered, that the choices people made every day could either reinforce the status quo or chip away at it. Every time you treat someone with respect, you're making a statement about the world you want to live in, she told a gathering of young professionals in Chicago. Every time you stand up for someone who's being treated unfairly, you're casting a vote for justice. These things might seem small, but they add up. They create a culture. They shape the way people think about what's possible. Her words resonated with audiences who were hungry for models of constructive engagement, tired of the polarization and anger that seemed to dominate public discourse. She received letters and emails from people who told her that her story had inspired them to act differently in their own lives, to speak up when they witnessed injustice, to give people second chances, to believe in the possibility of redemption. Not everyone agreed with her approach. Some critics argued that she was too forgiving, that by saving Walter Henderson's life and then celebrating his transformation, she was letting racism off the hook. They said that systemic oppression couldn't be fixed by individual acts of grace, that the focus on personal responsibility distracted from the need for collective action. Evelyn listened to these critiques with an open mind. She understood where they came from, recognized the frustration and pain that fueled them, and she acknowledged that her approach was not the only valid one, that there were many paths to justice and many ways to fight for change. "I'm not saying that individual action is sufficient," she replied in an interview that addressed the criticism directly. "I'm saying that it's necessary. We need systemic change, absolutely. We need policies that address structural inequities, institutions that hold people accountable, movements that demand justice. But we also need individuals who are willing to do the hard work of changing hearts and minds, one person at a time. These approaches aren't in competition with each other, they complement each other." It was a nuanced position, and it didn't satisfy everyone. But Evelyn had never sought universal approval. She had always been more interested in being true to her own values than in pleasing every audience. Years continued to pass, and Evelyn's hair began to grey at the temples, a visible reminder of the time that was passing and the mortality that awaited everyone, doctors and patients alike. She had never married, never had children, a choice that she had made deliberately and without regret. Medicine was her calling, her passion, and the consuming focus of her life. She had given everything she had to it, and it had given her a sense of purpose and meaning that she wouldn't trade for anything. But there were moments of loneliness too. Quiet evenings in her apartment, when the silence felt heavy and the future stretched out like an empty road. Holidays when her colleagues went home to their families while she stayed at the hospital, covering shifts for people with more personal obligations. The gradually shrinking circle of friends as careers and life transitions took people in different directions. Her mother, Loretta, passed away peacefully at the age of 89, leaving an emptiness that no amount of professional success could fill. Evelyn grieved deeply, taking time off work for the first time in years, sitting in her mother's house, surrounded by memories, feeling the full weight of loss. "You did everything you could, baby," her mother had said near the end. "Everything you could and more. Now it's time to rest." But Evelyn didn't know how to rest. She only knew how to work, to heal, to keep moving forward against the resistance of a world that had never stopped testing her. In the end, it was her body that forced her to slow down. A diagnosis of early-stage breast cancer at the age of 62 brought her face to face with her own vulnerability in a way that all her medical training hadn't prepared her for. She became a patient, submitting to surgeries and treatments that she had prescribed for others countless times but had never experienced from the other side. The experience was humbling. She learned what it felt like to be dependent on others, to wait anxiously for test results, to face the uncertainty of not knowing what came next. She learned that even the best doctors couldn't guarantee outcomes, that medicine was as much an art as a science, that hope and fear could coexist in the same heart. She also learned, to her surprise, that she wasn't alone. Cards and letters poured in from former patients and colleagues, from people she hadn't heard from in years, from strangers who had read about her story and wanted to express their support. Jasmine Williams came to visit, now a practicing cardiologist in her own right, and held Evelyn's hand the way Evelyn had held so many hands before. "You're going to beat this," Jasmine said, her voice fierce with conviction. "You've beaten everything else. This is just one more challenge." "Maybe," Evelyn replied, too tired for certainty, but still capable of hope. "Or maybe this is where my story ends. Either way, I'm at peace with it." "How can you be at peace? You have so much more to give." "I've given what I could. I've done what I was meant to do. If this is the end, I'll face it the same way I've faced everything else, with my head up and my heart open." But it wasn't the end. The treatments worked, the cancer went into remission, and Evelyn found herself on the other side of mortality with a new appreciation for life and its fragility. She returned to work, but on a reduced schedule, accepting that her body couldn't sustain the same pace it once had. She took on a mentorship role, sharing her wisdom with the next generation of cardiologists, ensuring that her knowledge and values would outlive her. Among her mentees was a young man named Derek Johnson, who reminded her in some ways of her younger self, brilliant, driven, impatient with the barriers that society placed in front of him. Derek was black, from a poor neighborhood in Detroit, and he had clawed his way into medicine through sheer force of will. "I don't want to hear about patience," Derek said during one of their conversations. "I don't want to hear about changing hearts and minds one at a time. I want to tear down the whole damn system and rebuild it from scratch." Evelyn smiled, recognizing the fire that she had once felt herself. "That's good. Hold on to that anger. It's fuel, but be careful not to let it consume you. I've seen too many brilliant people burn out because they couldn't pace themselves, couldn't distinguish between the battles that mattered and the ones that didn't. How do you know the difference? Experience and a lot of mistakes. You'll make them too. The key is to learn from them and keep moving forward." Derek became one of her most successful mentees, going on to a distinguished career in cardiac surgery and becoming a vocal advocate for healthcare equity. He credited Evelyn with teaching him how to channel his anger into productive action, how to fight for change without losing himself in the process. "She taught me that excellence is a form of resistance," he wrote in a tribute to Evelyn on the occasion of her retirement at the age of 70. "That every time you do your job at the highest level, you're proving that the stereotypes are wrong. And that sometimes the most radical thing you can do is simply refuse to let the bastards grind you down." The retirement celebration was held at St. Michael's Memorial Hospital, in the same cardiology wing where Evelyn had spent the best years of her career. Hundreds of people attended, current and former colleagues, patients whose lives she had saved, young doctors she had mentored, administrators who had watched her transform the department from the inside. Danny Henderson was there, now in his 60s himself, representing his father's legacy and the ongoing work of the scholarship fund that bore Evelyn's name. Jasmine Williams was there, along with a dozen other scholarship recipients who had become doctors, researchers, and healthcare administrators. And Patricia Holmes was there, retired now but still sharp-eyed and full of the practical wisdom that came from decades of nursing. "I've been thinking about what I want to say," Evelyn began, standing at the podium in the hospital's largest conference room. "And I realized that I don't want to talk about my accomplishments. They're on the record. They speak for themselves. What I want to talk about is what comes next." She looked out at the faces before her, a sea of humanity that represented everything she had worked for. Medicine is changing. Technology is advancing at a pace that makes everything I learned in medical school seem primitive. New treatments are being developed that will save lives in ways we can barely imagine. And the next generation of doctors, the ones who will be treating patients 20, 30, 50 years from now, will be more diverse, more empathetic, more equipped to understand the full range of human experience than any generation before them. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "I didn't do this alone. No one ever does. I stood on the shoulders of everyone who came before me, the pioneering black doctors who opened doors that had been locked, the civil rights activists who fought for the basic dignity that everyone deserves, the parents and teachers and mentors who saw potential in young people and refused to let it go to waste. And I hope that I've been a shoulder for someone else to stand on. That's all any of us can ask for, to leave the world a little bit better than we found it, and to trust that someone else will pick up where we left off." She took a deep breath, feeling the emotions rise up in her chest. "I'm going to miss this. The work, the people, the daily challenge of trying to heal broken hearts. It's been the privilege of my life, but I know it's time to step aside and let someone else have their turn. The future doesn't belong to me. It belongs to all of you." The room erupted in a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Evelyn stood at the podium, blinking back tears, overwhelmed by the outpouring of appreciation from people she had worked alongside for decades. Later, at the reception, Danny Henderson pulled her aside for a private conversation. "I never got to tell you this properly," he said, "but my father talked about you until the very end. He said meeting you was the most important thing that ever happened to him after meeting my mother and having us kids. He said you saved more than his life. You saved his humanity." Evelyn nodded, remembering the man who had once told her to go back to cleaning. "He did the hard work himself. I just gave him a reason to start. That's what you always say, but I want you to know that his transformation was real. It lasted. It changed our whole family. My kids grew up hearing stories about the black woman doctor who saved their grandfather's life and his soul. They've never known anything but respect for people who are different from them. That's your legacy too, Dr. Carter. Not just the lives you saved, but the lives you changed." Evelyn smiled, feeling the warmth of gratitude and closure wash over her. Then it was all worth it. Every difficult moment, every challenge, every time I wanted to give up. It was all worth it. She left the hospital that night for the last time as its chief of cardiology, walking through the corridors where she had spent so many hours, saying silent goodbyes to the spaces that had witnessed her triumphs and her struggles. At the main entrance, she paused and looked back at the building that had been her second home. "Thank you," she whispered, to the hospital and to everyone who had shared her journey within its walls. Then she turned and walked out into the Chicago night, where a gentle spring rain was falling and the city lights glittered like scattered jewels. Her career was over, but her life continued, and she faced the unknown future with the same quiet courage that had carried her through everything else. In retirement, Evelyn found a peace she hadn't known she was missing. She traveled, visiting countries she had read about, but never had time to see. She wrote a memoir, sharing her story with a wider audience and hoping that it might inspire others to pursue their dreams despite the obstacles they faced. She volunteered at a free clinic on the South Side, providing basic medical care to people who couldn't afford to see a doctor, and she spent time with the people who mattered to her, her family, her friends, her mentees who had become colleagues and confidants. She watched them thrive, seeing in their successes the continuation of everything she had worked for. One afternoon, when she was 78 years old, she received a visitor at her apartment. It was a young woman, perhaps 19 or 20, with dark skin and natural hair and eyes that burned with intelligence and determination. "Dr. Carter, I'm sorry to bother you. My name is Maya Henderson. I'm Danny Henderson's granddaughter. I just started medical school at the University of Chicago, and I wanted to meet you." Evelyn felt a surge of joy and wonder. The granddaughter of Walter Henderson, now pursuing the same path that Evelyn had walked so many years before. "Come in, Maya. Please, sit down. Tell me everything." Maya sat on Evelyn's sofa, her hands clasped nervously in her lap. "I grew up hearing stories about you from my grandfather. He said you were the reason he became a different person. The reason our whole family is different. Your great-grandfather was a complicated man," Evelyn said carefully. "He made mistakes, but he found the courage to learn from them. That's rare, and it's something to be proud of. I know. That's why I wanted to become a doctor. I wanted to be like you, someone who saves lives and changes hearts, someone who doesn't let prejudice stop them from doing what's right." Evelyn looked at this young woman, this living bridge between past and future, and felt a profound sense of hope. The work was continuing. The legacy was alive. "You don't need to be like me," she said gently. "You need to be like you. The world needs your unique gifts, your particular perspective. What worked for me might not work for you, and that's okay. The important thing is to stay true to your values, to keep learning, to never stop growing." "But how do you know when you're on the right track?" Evelyn considered the question, drawing on decades of experience to find the right words. "You know you're on the right track when you're making a difference in people's lives, when patients look at you with trust and gratitude, when you can go to sleep at night knowing that you did your best, even when your best wasn't enough, when you can face the hardest parts of the job without losing your humanity. That's how you know." Maya nodded slowly, absorbing the wisdom. "And when it gets hard, when people treat you unfairly because of what you look like, you keep going. You do your job so well that no one can question your competence. You treat everyone with respect, even when they don't treat you the same way. And you remember that their prejudice is their limitation, not yours. You are not defined by what others think of you. You are defined by what you do." Maya stayed for an hour, asking questions and listening to Evelyn's stories with the rapt attention of a disciple at the feet of a master. When she finally left, she hugged Evelyn tightly and promised to stay in touch. "Thank you, Dr. Carter. Thank you for everything." Evelyn watched her go, this young woman who carried the hopes of generations on her shoulders, and felt at peace. The work was never finished, but it was being continued by capable hands. That was all anyone could ask for. She closed the door and returned to her window, looking out at the city where she had lived and worked and loved and struggled. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and the lights of Chicago were beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. She thought about Walter Henderson, dead now for many years, but still present in the lives he had touched and the changes he had inspired. She thought about her mother, whose wisdom and faith had sustained her through the darkest times. She thought about all the patients she had saved and all the ones she had lost, each one a reminder of the precious fragility of human life. And she thought about herself, this woman who had started with so little and achieved so much, who had faced prejudice and pain and never lost her commitment to healing. It had been a good life, a meaningful life, a life that had made a difference. Evelyn smiled, feeling the warmth of the setting sun on her face, and closed her eyes in gratitude. This was what it meant to be a healer, to save lives, to change hearts, to plant seeds that would grow long after you were gone. She had done that. She had done that well. And now, in the quiet of the evening, she could finally rest.